everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. Steven, how you doing today?
Doing good, doing good. I'm really excited on this topic because kind of hits home for both of us. You're
Yeah.
very big in the investing side. I'm very big on, of course, the real estate world. So this is kind of like a nice blend between the two.
Yeah. And the clientele I tend to work with, obviously being real estate professionals, have a bit of a bias toward investing in real estate. So it's a conversation that I have often and one that I actually enjoy having sometimes, because sometimes it's nice seeing the light bulb come off when some new information is gathered by folks when it comes to stuff. So yeah, hopefully we can help some people make some better decisions on their own here in the future.
Exactly.
But yeah, so obviously big things we want to talk about are, the advantages and disadvantages of real estate investing. When I kind of look at things out there, I see a lot of people that are big into real estate investing. There's almost a bit of a faith-based kind of religious aspect to it sometimes that sometimes scares me just a little bit, but that doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means they might not be factoring in all things that they should be when talking about it. So kind of the first thing I thought we should talk about would be kind of some of the big advantages of investing in real estate, because it is definitely a time-tested way of building wealth over time, is investing in real estate. So Stephen, you're working with a lot of people that have real estate holdings. They're maybe getting more mortgages for rental properties or something like that. So what are some of the big advantages you see that people that have real estate investment portfolios?
The one of the biggest is, of course, is the cash flow. So it's something that can be paying for itself. And then you have to look at, I always tell people when they go in, there's usually two goals and they can blend together, but it's one goal is do I hold it for so long? And my big cash out is the equity on it, or do I need to make X amount of dollars per month for this to make even sense to purchase, kind of thing.
Right.
So the cash that can be there or is a huge, advantage for it, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And factoring in, like you said, like hopefully they're factoring in the expenses that go along with actually owning real estate. Because we all know if we've rented, something breaks, it ain't you as the renter that's going to be fixing it. And you call up the landlord or the management company or whoever. And if you're owning it, yeah, you're going to have to factor that in. But yeah, if they can break even with all that types of stuff, it could make sense too. Just the capital appreciation, the price increase of the house could be good over time. Of course, you want to try to be having some positive cash flow, but
yes, yep,
that's obviously the goal we're shooting for. But yeah, that's a big advantage, and it kind of goes into, I think, when we've talked before, you've mentioned sometimes people are kind of taking certain expenses on their taxes. So you want to talk a little bit about that with real estate?
exactly. I mean, you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot, especially we're in a market now where it's kind of predicted or expected that rates will go lower. So people that have bought homes now, if they are going to decide to refinance them, well, if they are usually your first year buying a rental property, once you put it on your tax returns, you're usually, taking out major expenses, repairs that you've done, anything like that, instead of just the normal, like, hey, I paid the taxes, I paid the insurance, the mortgage payments, minus from the rent, kind of thing. So when you take, let's say you were netting 20, or not even netting, let's just say you were grossing 20K, and then your mortgage was 10, so you net 10 for that year, but then you had $15,000 repairs before you even had that renter in there, or during when the renter is there. So now you're negative 5,000 for the year.
Well, yeah,
that's going on your debt to income ratio as a negative. When we're calculating, let's say you're trying to buy another primary house, you're trying to buy another investment property, so these are things that could, for a tax break purposes, it makes sense, because you don't want to pay taxes on money that you didn't technically earn, but it can come around and shoot you in the foot the other way, kind of thing.
Right. That's why you got to be smart with it, depending on what your long-term plan is. If you're just doing like a one and done, or hey, I'm investing in this latest property for the time being, maybe a few years before I look at something else. So that's not a big deal. But yeah, that goes into kind of the next advantage, is that the tax advantages that you can take when you own real estate. It's pretty significant. And I know there's a lot of material out there. So I don't think we need to go through line by line on the tax advantages that you take. But the big ones obviously being, the costs, the costs of not just maintenance and repairs, but also, your occupancy rate, the cost of not having the unit occupied over time, you can write off. Then also depreciation, which is a huge thing, especially if you're able to take bonus depreciation over time. Of course, there's a dark side to that, which is the one thing that never gets talked about on social media or TikTok or anything when they talk about, oh, you can depreciate the property X amount a year and then it lowers your taxes by Y amount. Yeah, they don't talk about the recapture on the back end unless you do like a 1031 exchange or something like that. They don't talk about how it lowers your cost basis. So when you go to sell it, you're actually going to have a larger gain than you thought you would, because it's going to lower your cost basis that you initially bought the property for. So you'll owe tax on more of the gain. Not a lot of people bring that up because it's not sexy, it's not cool, but hey, that's how it works.
It's the truth.
But there are some definite tax advantages to investing in real estate. And that is one of the, I hear a lot of times the big reasons that people invest in real estate. Is they really like those tax advantages.
Yes.
And then also the other thing that I find talking to a lot with folks is when I ask them, why do they like investing in real estate? Almost without fail, it's, hey, I can touch it. I can go out, I can put my hand on it, and it's something that I own. The land, the dwelling on it, those are things that I can go out and touch, and it's real. When they think a lot of other types of investments they might have are a little more, intangible or ethereal or in the ether out there, when we'll maybe get into that in a second. That's maybe not necessarily the case, but I know a lot of people really like their ability to touch it.
Yeah. I mean, it's, one is the American dream to own a house, own a property. So when you start multiplying those, like it's almost like a status level. Like, hey, I own, people always, call by doors. I own like, my primary and then 5 other doors kind of thing. Yeah. Which I mean, yeah, and if that's your game, that's what you want to do, all power to you. But as you're saying, like some of them were just like, I just only want it because I can go and touch it.
Right. Yeah. There's a bit of an emotional aspect to it that maybe we'll get into in a minute. So where if you actually run the numbers, maybe it doesn't make as much sense, but we'll talk about that in a moment. But yeah, they a lot of people too, I think you see it when you're doing other people's, investment property mortgages, is that cash flow, not just the price appreciation. They really like that cash flow that something like a rental property or a commercial property can generate for them.
Exactly. I mean, you get the cash flow part of it. Let's say you're making an extra $500 a month from it, pocketing that every month, which is, that's great kind of thing. And what I see a lot is people don't have like we need to show 6 months of reserves of that payment, because what if the occupancy rate's not great?
Right.
Kind of thing. What if the rental market goes down and now you're not renting it as often kind of thing? I mean, especially if you're looking at like short-term rentals, like the Airbnb market has completely changed what it was 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, that's always something that worries me a little bit when you see people that have they're leveraged to the hilt on these short-term rentals, and you're like, I'm not sure. In certain areas, you can totally do that, but it's very heavily location dependent. But
it is. It's definitely location dependent. I mean, and there's loan programs out there, like investment cash flow loans that we're only looking at what can that property rent for itself. And let's say your mortgage is $3,000, but it can rent for, $2,500. So it doesn't even cover the mortgage. Well, people are like, well, I'm Airbnb-ing it, so I'm going to make way more than that. So they'll sign off on the loan still, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And they're okay with that. Though, the worst case is it's only going to make 25, you're going to be negative 500. Or if Airbnb money, dries up, like I have seen that situation happen before too.
Yeah. I mean, that is actually a good segue into kind of our first disadvantages, I think, here is, boy, like owning, if you're doing direct management of your real estate portfolio, you own investment properties, commercial, whatever, boy, if you're choosing to take that on your own, that's a lot of work. Now that's a values judgment at the same time. Some people really enjoy that. And so it's more than just dollars and cents with them. They see the cash flow they generate, the price appreciation over time, but they actually really enjoy being a landlord. Maybe they enjoy fixing stuff or helping people out or doing that. I mean, for various reasons, they just enjoy the work. So for those people, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Or I'm sorry, it does make a lot of sense. But a lot of people, especially new real estate investors that are aspiring to own real estate, they think everything else maybe isn't where they want to put their money. They sometimes get in over their head pretty quick because they don't really accurately judge how much work doing that can take.
How much work it can take. You see this, even on people that are just trying to fix a house and flip it kind of thing. They don't realize how much cost it actually is. They didn't budget correctly. And they just see, things start coming up that if you don't run your numbers correctly on it or have a big enough budget on there, that you can easily eat into it.
Right.
And now the cash flow you were expecting or the ROI you were expecting is starting to dwindle because that's the only place that you can take the money from. So it's starting to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And then you realize like, oh, I just spent X amount of hours or days on this and only made, a small percentage what I thought kind of thing.
Right. And yeah, I think a good case in point for something like that too is like the unexpected stuff that pops up. I mean, I'm a boring millennial in my 30s, so of course I've watched HGTV in my time. But you see some of those shows on there where it's like, oh, we have so much money set aside in our budget for the renovation. And then they start doing it and you find some code violation or some issue with the house you never knew was there. And it's going to increase your budget by like 30-40%. And just doing that type of thing happens all the time in real estate investing. And so you've just got to be aware of it and be ready for it, like expect the unexpected. But a lot of newer people getting into it tend to really not anticipate the amount of extra money and work that it can actually take.
And I always say you need a buffer. Whatever
Right.
you think it's going to be, add a certain, 10-15% on top of that and say, okay, that's my actual budget. Because then if it does eat into it, you're already better off. If it doesn't, then you get a better ROI.
Yeah. And that's one thing too, like the ROI. We'll talk about that more in a bit, but kind of the other thing that, at least from my perspective, a lot of times as a financial planner, looking at all aspects of the investment world, your personal finances, the illiquidity of a real estate investment sometimes can be a real disadvantage, I feel like. So whatever you're putting in, you definitely want to make sure you don't need to get at any time soon because the market could shift on you. You could lose your job, God forbid, or whatever source you're using for income. Something terrible could happen. And you want to be careful having so much of your wealth tied up in an illiquid asset.
Exactly. I mean, we just went through the market where everything was going up, 20-25% over the year, which is not normal at all. Kind of thing where I was almost tempted to like, I'd rather just buy a property, let it sit there for 6 months, not have to do anything, and then put it right back on the market and then make a bunch of money. And then I'm like, knowing my luck, I'll buy it and the market will slow down. And now I got to hold it for years that I wasn't planning on. So, because it's not liquid, I can't pull it out fast enough.
Right.
So I always think that if you are going to look at it, you have to have the advantage of time
Big time
on your side. So if you have time on your side, hey, I'm going to buy this and I'm going to keep it forever so long. I see people buy places for their kids for college. Hey, they're going to live there for 4 years and rent out the rooms. And now it makes sense.
How old are the kids at that point?
Exactly. I mean, they're 18, 19. So
right.
they're renting it out for college and then
yep.
You're selling it. So but that's still a 3-4 year plan.
Yeah. And then that's also a way to kind of sometimes get your children in too. That can be an advantage. You start teaching your kids about here's how you invest in your future in this, and maybe you start giving them a little bit of responsibility of managing the property, or you get them to have a roommate too, and that's almost covering part of your rent, or I'm sorry, your mortgage payment with their rent. So a lot of the funny thing when we have this conversation is a lot of these advantages and disadvantages, they have a mirror image that can be flipped on its head. They can turn a disadvantage into an advantage and an advantage into a disadvantage. So you just got to be careful when you're doing stuff like this.
It's a lot of personal choice. It's your risk tolerance. What are
Mhm.
you willing to do? How much time are you willing to put into it? You can realize like, hey, it could be a little bit of time. It could be a whole bunch of time.
Right.
Kind of thing.
You can also take a little time to save up the money to get into it a lot of times, because I'm sure can speak to this well. It's a lot more restrictive getting a mortgage on an investment property than a primary home, right?
Exactly. I mean, if you are putting less down, let's just say I've seen people, you go down to 15%. Well, that's investment mortgage is already considered more risky than, of course, a primary or secondary kind of thing. If foreclosures were going to happen, the first payment you're actually going to miss is the investment property. Like you're going to always pay your primary, so you don't have a roof, always have a roof over your head. But so that's always why it's considered risky. The less money you put down, the more risk it is. So you do see that it is sometimes a hard barrier to break into kind of thing. But Now, we say we can flip it is, what if you take your primary house and you decide to rent that out and buy something else,
Right.
kind of thing. So that is an advantage that you can do that. Hey, you've already, maybe you bought a starter home, whatever the case is, where now you're like, hey, I've outgrown this, or it's too big, or whatever the case is. I'm going to have a great rate on it. I can get a great cash flow because I've owned it for so many years. Again, like we said, time is the biggest key in this. And now you're going to rent that property out for the cash flow and then go buy something else.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. It kind of reminds me of a conversation I had the other day with a potential client. And they're in the Army. They had found me online. I'd never met them, and this was our first conversation. So I was kind of asking them some questions about their background, and they were very partial to real estate investing. And I was asking how they got into it. And when he was commissioning in as a second lieutenant, he said he got, you get that kind of grant you could get from a scholarship or something like that. Or I can't remember if he said it was that or the USAA loan, one of those things you can get, where it's like super low interest rate, like $20,000. And he's probably one of the few people I've ever met that used it smartly. Most people that I've known that have done that, oh, I got $20,000 in cash, I'm gonna go get a car, or I'll do this.
Yeah.
Which is, something you're going to need going out into the world. But he took it and down payment on a rental property in a college area. And so they already own a few. And I was like, wow, that is probably one of the smartest uses of a low interest loan like that, to give you the down payment to then go ahead and start springboarding your real estate investing. And I mean, these people are 30 and they own three properties already, counting their primary home, which, but the hurdle they had to come over initially was that initial down payment. And that's the thing a lot of times that makes it so people have a tough time getting into it. And then from my perspective, when you're looking at things like opportunity costs or things like that, if they're saving up money for a home, that is money they could have been putting into something else that could have been growing at a quicker rate, in an earlier time in their life. And then, compound interest over time. What that $10,000 did if you invested it earlier, maybe in the stock market in just a simple index fund, versus saving it up over a period of a few years to then go ahead and buy a rental property. That's where you have to start running the numbers and start figuring out what your values and judgments are and figuring out what's important to you. And then try to figure out what makes sense.
Exactly. I mean, you could go over thousands of situations. It's going to be different for every person because if we like it or not, either numbers people or not, we're emotionally attached to it one way or the other because it's how it makes you feel and what you basically have the tolerance for. So that's why a good point with them is going off of like, okay, they took that debt that they had, purchased another debt, which everybody's like, that's bad, kind of thing, but they leveraged it in a smart way where now it's probably paying for itself, kind of thing.
Right.
And they're holding it over time, kind of thing. So not all debt is bad. It can be good. And it just depends on how you're actually leveraging. They, like you said, they could have took that money, bought a car, which we all know you drive away off the car lot, that it's half the value as soon as you drive away. Kind of thing.
Depreciating asset versus an appreciating asset.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I mean that does kind of get into one more point I wanted to hit on, which is what I've noticed a lot is the risk people are taking when they're investing in real estate. I notice a lot of folks who are heavily invested in it don't have I feel a full appreciation of the risk they're actually exposing themselves to sometimes. They think that, oh, well, nobody's making real estate anymore. Real estate always goes up in the long run, so this is a good investment. But they don't maybe realize, oh, I own a bunch of short-term rentals, or maybe just a single family home, rentals like that in one market in the country, in, let's say, a working class neighborhood or a affluent neighborhood. Bottom line is they're not diversified at all when they're building out their wealth. And sometimes they're blind to that because they think real estate only goes up. It's not really risky in the long run. Well, you could kind of take that same viewpoint and put it on the stock market as well. Because if you zoom out, you're like, well, the stock market over time has gone up X amount. Real estate over time has gone up Y amount. If you take both those and zoom them out to a long enough time horizon, they both do well for people. So you just got to keep that long-term mindset and not get distracted by, like you said, kind of your emotional biases or whatever, into accidentally falling into a risk level that you actually aren't comfortable with. Because you mentioned, knowing your risk tolerance. A lot of times people, they're like, my risk tolerance is this, and the risk of what I'm invested in is this, so we're good. But they actually have misjudged the risk tolerance of what they're investing in. It's actually up here.
Yeah.
So that's what I see a lot of times as a disadvantage, is people get lulled into a false sense of complacency. But I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
It is. I do see that. Like, I have a couple investors that, some of them are straight, has to make this much money a month from day one, or they will not touch it. Some are, hey, my risk tolerance is I'm holding it for 4 or 5 years. So as long as the rent covers the mortgage, they don't care, kind of thing.
Right.
And they have, both of them, they have a usually 6 to 12 months of reserves sitting in a separate account that's meant for that one property only.
Okay.
And they have 4 or 5, 6 properties where each account is for a different one, not just one account for all, but they'll have, 1, 2, 3 Fake Street at this bank. Here's 12 months worth of reserves sitting there for. So if something happens, they know they can pull from there, kind of thing. Now they smartly have invested that way. They started out with their primary house, rented it out, and moved on and moved on and moved on. And eventually now they have 4 or 5 houses under their portfolio each.
Yeah.
And now they have actually started the investment game. So they were just moving from primary house to next primary, making that old one a rental, doing it again, and just keeping them. And then eventually said, you know what? We actually want to start investing in purchasing investment properties.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. That's a much more deliberate way of doing something sometimes, and you're not jumping into it. Because I'm sure you see a lot is that if your rental property cannot withstand a few months of the cash flow being negative, then you're actually not.
It's not a good investment.
You're not investing, you're gambling.
Yeah.
At that point.
And
like
that's
you said, those. Yeah,
you want to get away from that. If you want to gamble, go to Vegas, go to a casino. Like, you can go do that all day long. Somebody will, or if you just want to have somebody take your money, I'll take it from you. But it's making that smart decision of that the time frame you're looking at this and the opportunity that you have, but you have to weigh all of the disadvantages that are out there, kind of thing. And that's where a lot of people don't look at, kind of thing.
Well, I think, kind of, if we're trying to sum up what we're saying here, is like real estate investing is a great way to build wealth over the long run. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not, neither of us is saying you should invest in the stock market over real estate. You should do this. You need to go into it really with any investment with both eyes open, knowing what you're getting into, having a good deliberate plan on how to start investing in it if you haven't started. And then also, once you've built up your investment portfolio, or as you're building it, having a good concrete plan to make sure you can survive the rough times and not have everything implode.
Exactly. And on our other podcast, we were talking about like character. Well, there's even character on investments, kind of thing. If this investment doesn't feel right to you,
right?
Not that somebody's pitching you to you, but just the facts of that investment doesn't feel right to you, it's time to go to the next one, kind of thing. Because there's always going to be an opportunity somewhere else, and that you shouldn't force yourself into an opportunity. If it's an actual opportunity that's meant for you, like, you'll fit into it just fine.
Yeah. Oh, we could do a whole episode on investments that don't feel right. Because they're blowing smoke up your butt. But yeah, I think it's a great investment over time, real estate. Definitely, if that's in somebody's priors, it's in their biases, there's nothing wrong with getting after it and getting into real estate investing. You just got to know what you're getting into and just do it in a deliberate, cautious manner. And then at the end of the day, if you do that, you'll be okay.
I think that's exactly to the point. Like you said, know your risk tolerance, uncover every stone as much as you can beforehand, and then make that personal decision if it's right for you.
Yeah. So for everybody, I hope you all enjoyed our episode here. If you have any sort of discussions or topics you guys want to hear from us in the future, go ahead and let us know, and we'll add it into the repertoire. But until next time, Stephen, you want to say bye to everybody?
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Yes, we'll talk to you all later next time. Everybody stay safe out there.